Infinity Pool, the latest from director Brandon Cronenberg, son of legendary David Cronenberg, that proves that, hey, Canada can do things too. Though I'm still not entirely sure how I feel about this movie, and I've seen it twice. I think a lot of that has to do with, as I was watching it the first time, I guess I expected it to go in a different direction, and then it didn't. But I appreciate the story it's trying to tell. We've got some vibes of White Lotus and Black Mirror, but told in a way that feels uniquely Brandon Cronenberg. Mean, cruel, unrelenting, characters filled with emptiness, and loaded with practical effects that you'll probably be shocked to find were practical effects. I overall really appreciate the feel of his movies, even if this one didn't completely hit for me. Though I watched this with Karsten Runquist and he adored it, so mileage will vary. But I will say that Brandon has a very distinct feel to his movies. He has a great hand with practical effects, and while a lot of it does share similarities with his father, I do feel that it is unique in its own right. And I went into this movie at Sundance with no prior expectations other than having seen Possessor and knowing that it starred Alexander Skarsgard and Mia Goth. I didn't watch any of the trailers, I didn't watch teasers, I had no idea what it was about. So I went into it expecting it to be like super violent, but I guess an area where it was excessive was in the weird sex stuff area. It's not constant, but there's a couple scenes that you're like, did I just see what I think I just saw? And yeah, I did see what I saw, because the Sundance version actually has 90-ish seconds that are different. I know a lot of people are arguing with me, being like, no, that scene's still in the theatrical cut. I know what it looks like in the theatrical cut, and I can guarantee you that more is happening in the Sundance cut. There is a reason why I'm referring to this one as the cum cut. It's not as hard to watch from a graphic standpoint compared to something like Possessor, which I do think I still prefer as a movie, but there's definitely still some wild scenes. It's just not this like bloody gore fest. And if for some reason you were hoping for something that was a little bit more visceral, keep an eye out for Talk to Me. It's by the Raka Raka guys, and I've loved the ending, but that was the one that had the scenes where you're like, oh god. But I think a lot of the times the ideas presented in Infinity Pool are more interesting than the movie itself ends up being. Though I'm sure a lot of people are going to disagree there. I have friends who absolutely adored this, but that's just kind of how I felt walking out. It's a class satire that also feels like Cronenberg might be kind of unpacking some stuff and feelings he has about himself. Skarsgard's an author in this. I know that originally he wanted to be an author, and there's some definite unpacking of like how you get certain opportunities in life in this movie. And a major aspect of this story seems to be just breaking down this individual who wants so desperately to be seen as more than he is, but his writing venture failed and he only got the opportunity because of his wife. Not that I'm suggesting that that's how Brandon is as a person, but I'm sure he spent a lot of time thinking about his career and its relation to his father, and I'm sure some reviews and engagement with his work is more scathing as a result of that. But this movie just falls a little bit too on the trippy side for me. I'm not usually a fan of most trip scenes in movies, and some of my favorite movies have scenes that I just like to skip through. And one of those trip scenes is definitely where there's other shots being spliced in instead of what we saw at Sundance, so goody! Though I'm pretty sure the theatrical cut still got the very weirdly disgusting nipple extension dribble scene, but I don't know, maybe it wasn't as intense. It just kind of results in most of this movie feeling like some sick fever dream. And if you like that kind of stuff, this is probably really gonna work for you, but if you don't, it might feel a little tedious. This movie isn't scary in a jump scare way or the type of thing that's gonna keep you awake at night, but if it hits even a little bit, it will probably leave you with this horrific sense of dread, which is pretty impressive because this movie is unusually comedic. Like, I laughed way more than I thought I was going to at the press screening. So the no spoiler premise, Skarsgard is an author, James Foster, on a resort vacation looking for inspiration with his wife in the fictional country of Liatolka. But James quickly gets swept up in the charms of Mia Goth's Gabby, as many have this year. I've seen so many of you people saying that you're willing to line up for the slaughter. And as expected, everything goes to hell. But you know what could connect to a Liatolkan server if it wasn't a made-up country? Today's sponsor, Surfshark. So I'm currently dealing with a unique issue. I'm in the United States for the Sundance Film Festival, meaning I can't access my Canadian Crave subscription, meaning I can't keep up with The Last of Us on Sundays. And I need to watch The Last of Us on Sundays. Well, thanks to Surfshark VPN, I can. All I had to do was connect to a Canadian server location, making my internet think that's where I was, and I was easily able to stream the latest episodes comfortably from any location of the festival, which is kind of essential when you're just running around from theater to theater. Surfshark VPN has thousands of different server locations all around the world that you can quickly connect to across all your devices with one account. So if you find out that a movie or a TV show that you love or want to check out is on Netflix but only in Japan or India, all you have to do is use Surfshark to connect to one of those countries, and you're good to go. It's super fast, secure, blocks unwanted ads, and if you use code JEDI, you can save a massive 83% plus get an additional 3 months free. And if that wasn't good enough, they offer a 30-day back money guarantee if you're not completely satisfied, so make sure to click the link in the description down below to try out Surfshark and its many features for yourself. So let's slide into the movie. That means spoilers. Honestly, a huge chunk of this just feels like a massive PSA against peer pressure. Like, just because you're a 40-something-year-old failed author does not make you too old to succumb to the dangers of peer pressure to look cool. So as mentioned, this is a resort in a fictional country, but it is clearly just supposed to be any country with the resort that we go to where everywhere outside the resort location is dealing with corruption and poverty. But then the tourists just get to live like it's a tropical daydream. There's literal barbed wire gates, armed security guards were shown pretty early on that the locals don't appreciate the tourists. But the way they shoot this movie doesn't make it look like a tropical paradise. It is grim and dark and gloomy. We get exaggerated camera tilts and spins early on that pull in and out of shots. It's quite unsettling. And Skarsgard's largely unimpressed by the entire thing. His wife's trying to make plans to go on a boat tour and then to the Chinese restaurant in town, but it's not really a town, just a fake one that they've built inside the resort. Cronenberg's even commented that going to these types of resorts don't feel like experiencing another culture or visiting another country. It feels like you're going to a different dimension. So I kind of assumed that Skarsgard here was the power piece of the couple, but no. His book didn't sell well, was panned critically, and the only reason it was published is because his wife's dad owns a publishing company, which is also how he's had the ability to not work for 6 years after a failed book. So when Mia Goth pops up knowing exactly who he is, saying that she loved his book, he is putty in her hands. So suddenly he's totally down to go to the Chinese place in town. And it's here that you'll start noticing that there's just these caricatures for different cultures and communities, because the people here don't really care about experiencing real culture. They just want to give off the illusion of culture, though some of it is very weird. There was like this random brief scene of like a horrible Jewish stereotype. But against all better judgments and the literal rules of the resort, Gabby and her husband Albin convince the couple to leave the resort for a picnic, where Mia Goth just gives him a wraparound wank. And in the Sundance version, we see full dick, full ejac splat. So it's not just his ego she's stroking. I'll stop. I have had to confirm it is significantly less graphic theatrically. But it all comes crashing down when James hits and kills a local on the drive back to the resort after the lights start to cut in and out on the car. So he's fucked. Gabby and Albin throw him under the bus, say that he stole the car to go on a joyride, and his wife ends up going along with that story to avoid being put in a foreign prison. And his punishment? Being executed by his victim's oldest son.
What did you say?
But don't worry, in a tourism initiative, international travelers and tourists have the option to have a double stand-in for their execution. An actual double, a literal clone, as long as they have the money to pay for it, which they can conveniently get from the basement ATM. Basically the real-life phenomenon that if you have a lot of money or are deemed a more important person bureaucratically, you can just pay your way out of anything, including manslaughter. So he gets taken to this pool that looks like it's loaded with this like thick blood before a blue substance starts getting pumped in. And we're into our first trip. There are a lot of flashes in this and throughout the movie, so be careful if you're sensitive to that. Lots of flashes. He starts seeing a naked Mia Goth, and we see his body being digitally recreated before he wakes up to be shown his literal double.
It looks just like her.
Oh my God. That he then has to sit and watch be killed.
Help me!
And at first, as expected, he's horrified. But then you can tell that he's getting kind of into it. He's captivated, fascinated, there's like the hint of a smile on his face, and his wife is horrified. Hilariously, they provide him with an urn of his double's ashes, which I just thought was a fantastic touch. It's like a nice little souvenir of your execution. But everything goes downhill from here. Yes, somehow watching your own execution by hands of a child is not the low point. He can't find his passport, so they can't leave. But it doesn't really seem like he wants to, because he instantly just books out his room until the end of the season. So I assumed he was going to use this as some kind of inspiration to write like a horrific book, and then maybe just kind of fall into like continuously doing it for that inspiration. Because he watched himself die. That's pretty wild. That would definitely inspire anyone with a penchant for writing. But it doesn't really end up being about that, even though Gabby says that was her intention in setting him up.
Maybe think of it as a gift.
Yes, apparently she thought this would be some great inspirational gift to him because they've gone through it too. Albin was designing an infinity pool, like a real one, at a rival resort. The plane fell and killed 2 workers. He was held responsible, so they were doubled, executed, and they both loved it. Basically saying that you come out feeling a way that you can't really describe, but she can see that it's happening in his eyes too. Now, if I was him, I would run my ass in the opposite direction, but she's speaking to his ego. And now he feels like he's part of this intimate club of a very unique experience. But not an exclusive one. Apparently there is an entire group of these people that call themselves zombies, which I thought was a very nice touch. They're obviously all very wealthy, and apparently they come back every year to celebrate. And this is where the most obvious question comes up. How do you know that they killed the double and not you? How do you know if you're ever really yourself ever again? Which they don't really explore as a concept, but so much of this movie has to do with self-perception, identity, and the destruction of the self. And if you're interested about the doubling itself, all we know is that apparently it's some long-standingly Tolkien tradition that's now just been co-opted for rich travelers. But I think it's part of the point that they never dive into it fully. One of the zombies is a doctor that's been studying the concept, and he says that the Western world's never been able to figure out how to do it because we're far too literal, we never take into account, and then he immediately gets cut off, and it's never gone back to. Because it doesn't really matter. They don't care about it as a function as long as it's available to them to be abused. Because it becomes clear that these doublings aren't isolated, unfortunate events as a result of a very strict country. They basically treat the entire place like a debaucherous playground, committing increasingly offensive crimes with no consequences to themselves due to the freedom of responsibility while vacationing and this option they have. And they somehow get James to go along with it. They steal ceremonial masks, which you guys have all been creeped out by, from the gift shop because there is no respect for culture here and even they have to commodify their own culture. They break into a mansion, tie people up, wreck the place, and then Mia starts a shootout. A scene that was simultaneously hilarious and horrific because it just ends with her unloading a clip while wildly screaming in a way that only Mia Goth can, before it hard cuts to them back in jail, where it almost seems like they're really gonna be held accountable this time. The detective said he wants to try something new with them, and then suddenly he's not letting them buy their way out and walking them to the execution ground. Until you realize that it's the doubles that were put in the holding cell and the originals are just sitting there on the bleachers just giddily clapping while they watch themselves get murdered. At this point, they're just seeking any novel experience they can to feel special. But then they turn around and try to justify it all as some weird self-improvement exercise. Like you can never unlock your true potential and break through to who you really are and what you can do unless there's no risk of consequence involved.
Not everybody gets this job.
Rich people bullshit. And I love the disconnect between how Mia talks about this phenomenon as it relates to James and how his wife does. Mia says that she can see this amazing, unique change inside James, especially around the eyes. But his wife says that he's specifically gone wrong around the eyes, looking like one of those crabs at the dump. So he's got the person who loves and supports him telling him the truth, but obviously he's gonna gravitate towards the person that's feeding his ego. The one who's making him feel like the person he believes he is versus the person who's literally bankrolling his life. So Em leaves and he's not remotely sad to see her go because he's fully bought into this lifestyle. And Gabby feeds that even more by saying that women like Em only exist to bring men like James down and hold them back from their full potential. And he eats it right up, even though his wife is literally the one that supports him because he has no handle on his life and desperately wants to believe that he's more. Which dives us even further into this class inequity. It's not just explored from an exploiting resources and using their money to buy things standpoint, but also through racism and disdain that they all seem to have for the tokens. But then they turn around and are still super happy to use them for other luxuries like their religious spiritual drugs, guns, and just further access to their sick games. And Mia is particularly hateful. She calls them baboons, primitives, yet they're the ones running around committing various crimes, destroying things, murdering, and stealing. So it does end up being a pretty good exploration of how rich people just mess things up in the places they travel to. And because those countries tend to be filled with more poverty, they are willing to put up with a lot of this bullshit to keep the tourists happy. But where I really feel like this movie shines is in that total destruction of James as a person, which we are about to dive into with Kaleidoscope Orgy. The scene that people think is intact based on the theatrical cut, but I can assure you it is significantly more graphic in the Sundance cum cut. So Mia gets him to take the aforementioned religious hallucinogenics, which are also an aphrodisiac, because of course they are. And it's super weird. It starts with the two of them going at it before all the other zombies join in. Eventually they all end up in their masks, which is just playing on the idea that they're wearing these masks in a figurative sense. There's hands going in and out of folds, and at one point a peen kind of busts out of a vagine, but like from the inside going out, and I can't really get more descriptive than that because we're on YouTube. Then of course there's like the nipple bubble ooze scene, which I still think is the most disgusting thing in the movie, and I think a good chunk of that is intact in the theatrical cut, if not all of it. If you're into psychedelic trippy shit or scenes like that in movies, you'll probably really enjoy it. For me, I've never really been a fan of that, so I didn't much enjoy it. But the orgy does something to James. It makes him a dick. The next morning, they're just like spitting berries at other resort members, and he just thinks he's king shit, so obviously he's gonna get cut down. One of the zombies says that the detective is blocking James from having a new passport issued. So to gain his respect, they need to kidnap him and beat the shit out of him. Make it make sense. Obviously they do it. James just starts beating him down, pisses on him, everyone starts like recording him with their cell phone, which is when Mia pulls off the hood to reveal that it was actually another James double. They literally bribed the detective to make a double so they could use it in a hazing ritual. So this is the moment he realizes that they don't think of him as hot shit, they see him as a plaything. No shit, you're not even the one with the money for the lifestyle they love, dude. So he's ready to go, and as I had initially wondered, he was in fact the one to hide his own passport so he could stay longer. But while headed to the airport, the zombies hunt him down and start forcing him to walk back to the resort. Which is where they really break his ego. Mia reveals that she never actually read his book. Apparently they wanted a plaything and a new member, figured out who he was, and knew that ego is exactly the way to get through to him. No use thinking too hard on the logistics here. But she's just cutting him down while laying on the hood of this car, prodding him along the road, saying that they thought they were going to have to set him up to get in trouble, but he's so stupid he did it all on his own. That he's so stupid and vain to think that anyone would have read his book, let alone enjoyed it. Then starts reading him a negative review. All about how untalented he is, how he was only published because of his father-in-law, and you just see his face turning to rage. He tries to escape, but then Mia shoots him in the leg, but he manages to get to this farm where the locals actually help him, which just shows how much better they are as people. He has a dream about the kid who executed his double, who just starts like choking him with this like creepy, horrific smile on his face, like they cast that kid perfectly, before he like rips that kid's head in half, before then his whole body gets ripped in half, which, you know, makes sense, all the doubles being made and all the things that they're doing. Obviously the zombies find him and they bring the double along with them, but this time as a dog. I absolutely love that Skarsgard was willing to commit to that for the red carpet. And I am pretty sure this is the double that he had beat up before because he has the same like injury on his nose and face. I went back in the Sundance screener and I did watch it twice. But Mia says he has to kill the dog to complete his transformation. Kill yourself to free yourself and release your past. But he's pretty done. He refuses to until the double attacks him, so he has no choice but to fight, and then just beats him in the head until it explodes, which is probably the most visually gory scene of the movie in my opinion. And he's just reduced to an emotional mess, sucking on Mia's teat like a baby that she's moistened with his own blood. I don't know, it's just vibes and weird aftercare at this point. And to them, he is reborn, worthy to be one of them, or at least their permanent plaything. Cuts to the next day, he's a shattered man, ego crushed, finally headed home with his urns. And I guess it's time for all of them to leave, and it's jarring. They're right back to normal, talking about day jobs, nannies, the hired help. Like this was any other inspirational retreat or vacation and not a debaucherous nightmare. As it zooms in on him looking broken as they genuinely expect him to come back next year. But he can't go back to how he was. This did actually change him, or at least make him realize who he is. It forced him to confront all of his own failings in life, his false views of his own ego and accomplishment, and the man he killed. And the noise all swells around him in the airport until it just cuts, and it seems like he doesn't get on the plane, just looks at his ticket, focusing in on the name as if he's questioning what that even means. And it also showed that all this was happening in 2018, which I will talk about in a minute, before it cuts to him on the closed down resort beach, sitting in the pouring rain. Because he can't just go back to normal, and he'll never be who he was again. See what I mean? Just very bleak, dreary ending, but in a good way. I saw a lot of people talking about how the him at the airport and the him at the beach would have been different versions of himself. But again, I had the Sundance screener, I compared injuries. The one that was at the airport definitely had all the same facial markings as the one who had got out of the fight. It's definitely not the dog one, who was definitely the same one he beat up because he killed the dog one. But I will say that the one on the beach doesn't seem to have any severe injuries, but he also has a lot more facial hair, so I think a little bit of time has passed at least. But hey, there is a possibility that there's just another double floating around. I don't know why or how he'd have his clothing, but at one point he almost gets hit by a police van, and then like the head looks out the window and it it like kind of looked like him, but I kind of forgot to go back and pause on that. I don't really know if that makes a lot of sense though. But even if it was a different version of him, I think it really is just to stress home the same idea. That he can't shut out his actions like the rest of them. A piece of him will always be there. So that's all really interesting to think about. I just wish it had been executed better. I love that they're just able to bribe the detective to make another double of him, to just fully pull away any kind of autonomy over his own personhood that he has. I might have liked to see it hit a point where he ran out of money to pay for doubles because his wife cut him off, so that he actually would have had to deal with the consequences of his actions, but I get that that is not what this story is going for, so that's fine. And like I said, I do really enjoy this doomer destruction of the self and his utterly destroyed ego aspect, because he can't run away from himself and the realization of his own emptiness. And it's not this process that's made him empty, he's always been empty. One of the first lines of the movie is his wife saying that he's so frozen that she can't tell when he's awake or asleep. He has no substance, and that's where his shortcomings and his failings come from. But the zombies are empty too, they just use all this to pretend that they're so much deeper than they are. But just like an infinity pool, it's all an illusion, and eventually it ends. And as dreary as it is, James is actually way better off with this bleak self-realization. And Skarsgard just sells it with this like perfect look of insecurity that you can like feel in his eyes. Now, a couple things I really focused in on, whether it means anything at all. Him looking at the plane ticket showing his full name and that it's September 29th, 2018. So I was wondering if something happened in Cronenberg's life or his personal life around that time, because I just really don't know why they would have distinguished that it was 2018 instead of now. Unless he really just wanted to dodge any kind of COVID comparisons, I don't know. But the big thing I found that on that exact day, a Cronenberg with Cronenberg retrospective festival started. So basically an entire section of a film festival dedicated to his father, so there was a lot of interviews and articles coming out at the time, and one of the interviews released that day commented how he might be completely done with horror, or actually might be done with filmmaking in general. So it might just be some kind of nod to his father's work and how his father is largely the reason he's had the opportunities he's had in the film world. I also know that Antiviral came out in 2012, which would have been 6 years prior to the events of this film, so that was Cronenberg's first big movie. James hasn't written a book in 6 years, so it might have been how he felt creatively before the Possessor comeback. Or maybe it's nothing and I'm looking way too into it and it's just a random date and year and I'm just this person who can't stop looking into it. But let me know what you guys are thinking. I think so much of this and the movie are open for some great theories. But this Infinity Pool, another one that I really appreciate what it's going for, and I really like what it introduced conceptually, but I don't necessarily love how it was executed. That is going to do it for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching. Thanks as always to my Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members. Subscribe to the channel if you're new, leave a like on the video if you're into that kind of thing. All my social medias are linked down below. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. I'm mostly okay, and we'll catch you all later.